Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast, coming to you during what I suppose can be called the latest off part of the off season, with a lot of teams going through their mandatory minicamps last week. But now that that's over, there's no real action to talk about. There will still be some news, and trust me, we are going to be diving into one of the more important and more weirder stories, shall we say, that came out of mandatory minicamps right off the bat once we go through this. But nonetheless, still plenty to talk about in the NFL this week. But before we do all that, I want to get the admin out of the way, and that's as easy as saying thank you very much for listening to this. If you are new, don't forget you can like, you can subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. We are also on social media. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on Instagram, on YouTube, and on TikTok, and on Twitter we are at MRB Sports Media. And for those of you who are return listeners, I want to once again thank you for making us, even if it's just a small part of your week, still part of your week. And as we continue to build this venture into something that is hopefully going to be very fruitful and very exciting for all of us. Now, with all that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show. And there's only really one place for us to start, and that is with the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers, who you would think that after everything that went on last year, after everything he made the New York Jets do, not only to get him, but to make him feel comfortable by making the trade with the Packers, fine. But then going on and making all the trades and getting the players that you'd think he would like, and getting Randall Cobb, for instance, one of his former teammates, to make him feel comfortable, getting everything that he would need to be a success in New York, and then obviously it all fails after 4 plays. You would think that he would want to be doing everything he can to pay back to the New York Jets what they missed last year. And I will give him some credit. He has done a lot of good things. The fact that he was training towards the end of last year when there was some hope that maybe he would be able to come back. It would have been a miraculous recovery, but the way they were talking, they were at least giving you an inkling that he might be able to come back and play a part towards the season if they were in a playoff push. And even in the immediate off-season, he was there. He's been in various training camps over the course of the off-season. He's been doing a lot of things. And the attitude that he at least seemed to come out with was positive. There was the comment that came out back in January basically saying that all the BS for bleeping purposes that has nothing to do with winning has to get out of the building. That is the sort of language you would want from your franchise quarterback, someone that the Jets gave up and did all this for. But to then have it thrown back in their faces the way that it is done now is quite shocking. And again, if I was a New York Jets fan, I would be very, very worried, because this is the start of the mandatory minicamps. And whilst they say mandatory, no, it's not voluntary like some of the stuff that's gone on before, and the stuff that Aaron Rodgers was at. So you can maybe give him a slight bit of a pass by saying he at least put in some work. But when it comes to mandatory minicamps, this is really the first start of the real business, shall we say, of the preseason, and when teams really do start to ramp up their preparations coming up. We're only 6 weeks roughly away from the first preseason games. These are the days that you want your players to be there. And whilst there will be some, obviously not everyone can be there. A player could still be recovering from an injury from last season, or their wife could be pregnant or whatever. There is always some level of flexibility to the mandatoriness. But the way that Aaron Rodgers had done this, and the fact that this was an unexcused absence, which is always a key word, whilst head coach Saleh has sort of tried to minimise the situation by saying that him and Rodgers are on the same page, I just still think this is a bad look for the New York Jets as an organisation. And again, and as I say, as a fan, I would be extremely worried with how this is working out, because, as I say, this is the really first chance that you're going to get, or the first big chance to start prepping things for next season. And whilst Aaron Rodgers, is one of the greatest quarterbacks on all time, I'm sure he doesn't need to put in every single bit of work. Given what has happened, in a normal circumstance, he wouldn't have to put in as much work. Tom Brady, if he missed the first week of minicamp or mandatory minicamp, I'm sure you could give him a pass because of his level of work and his familiarity with his main targets like Gronkowski and Edelman and Welker back in the day, so on and so forth. But after what happened with the Jets last season, and it wasn't Aaron Rodgers' fault, but after everything that happened, you would think he would want to do everything he could to make sure that he is getting that Super Bowl. He is going to be the one to lift that curse or that jinx or whatever you want to call it around the New York Jets. This is what they brought. This is what they brought him in for, to be that savior for them. And if he's seen to not be putting in 100% effort 100% of the time after last season, that has got to really sting and really be a kick in the teeth to a New York Jets fan. And whilst we don't know exactly why Aaron Rodgers is gone, there has been some memes on the internet or some jokes that there happens to be an Awanaska, Wyanaska, however you pronounce that retreat. I believe I saw again, a meme, whether or not it's true. I'm saying it may not be true, so I'm giving myself some plausible deniability there. But some memes that there was a ayahuasca conference in Peru and Colombia, I think, this past week that it would coincide with. Again, it wouldn't be out of character for Aaron Rodgers to do that. I'm not accusing him of doing that, but it would not be out of character. It could just be something. It could be something simple. He could be at a friend's wedding that was happening on Sunday, and he hasn't got back in time. It could be something as simple as that. But either way, it is still not a good look for the man you are hoping to do this for, and win everything for, to just disown you like that in that way. If this was a third string cornerback that doesn't really matter, then yeah, it would not be as big a story or as big a deal. But given that this is not just a quarterback, this is the quarterback for the New York Jets, what are New York Jets fans thinking? Is Aaron Rodgers really all in on the Jets? Or is he just here because they are the ones that were willing to pay and are now willing to pay him whilst he just sits around and does this? Is he really fully committed to the New York Jets? I would have serious questions about that if I was a Jets fan. He's just going to act as something to beat him with at the end of the season. If the New York Jets don't, it is essentially Super Bowl or bust. It was Super Bowl or bust anyway, because of, again, how much they gave up for him and how much they were willing to do. But after all this, if they don't make the playoffs or they fall short or have a absolutely horrendous season, it is going to be used as a stick to beat him with by saying, "Oh, this wouldn't have happened if Aaron Rodgers was 100% committed during the off season." And whilst this is just one event, I'm sure he will show up at training camp and be available for all the preseason games. But this still is just one of those things that it didn't need to happen this way. Again, an excused absence because of whatever, fine. This is what happens. This is life. But an unexcused absence, given everything that went round and everything in context with Aaron Rodgers, something's not right. And I'm not one of those conspiracy theories, but it does make you think, is he really fully committed to the Jets, or is he just using them as a paycheck, as I mentioned earlier? He has to do a lot. Again, when the players get back for their next stage and during the preseason, he has to do absolutely everything, because one little slip or one drop in production, or if we see an increase in interception, say, people are going to look back on this and say, well, how fully committed was he during training camp or during practice when he couldn't even be bothered to show up for mandatory minicamps? I might be making a mountain out of this, but Aaron Rodgers did this to himself and to the New York Jets. So they and Aaron Rodgers specifically have a lot of questions to answer when it comes to all this. And again, if they're not successful, I feel this is going to be said about for weeks of, you can use this as an example. How fully committed was he to the New York Jets? So it's up to him now to prove everyone wrong. But given everything we've seen about Aaron Rodgers, even in the past, even going back to his Green Bay days, the problems he's had with various teammates and executives, and wasn't 100% willing to teach Jordan Love everything. Are we 100% sure that he's fully committed? And again, this is going to come back to bite him if things go horribly, horribly wrong. And now moving on to the next topic that came out of last week's news, and that was the news that Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars has quite rightly earned his new contract, which will see him earn $275 million over the next 5 years, with $200 million of that guaranteed. I suppose really we should be possible up to $275 million with $200 million guaranteed. So a fair deal, I think, given the way that the quarterback market is going, it was always going to happen. And given how desperate the Jaguars have been for a quarterback over the years, this was always going to be exactly what Trevor Lawrence would get. And again, given his line of work so far, 100%, 1000% deserved. But this isn't really about Trevor. This isn't really about Trevor Lawrence. What this topic is about is going to be what the impact is going to be on the next set of quarterbacks. Because the next ones who are in line for their big deal is Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott and Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. And Dak Prescott, I've talked about before. I think there's going to be a situation. I don't see how the Dallas Cowboys sign him. I think there's going to come to that impasse where they are not going to be willing to pay him what he thinks he has earned. And with all these numbers setting the market, as it were, that's a phrase that Jerry Jones used. I just don't see how there's going to be any way that the Dallas Cowboys are able to pay Dak Prescott what he is going to want, especially when you consider the players that they are going to have to also be paying in the future, such as CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons. I think there is going to come a point where they're going to look at it and say, you know what, we're going to have to go down the rookie quarterback route and stack everything around him and try to win when he's on his rookie deal. There's no way that we can afford to pay Dak Prescott, let's just have, for the sake of the argument, $55 million a year. There's no way that they can do that whilst also keeping Micah Parsons happy and CeeDee Lamb happy. There's just no way that they are going to be able to do all of that. And just the way things are going to time out. Now, there's contract negotiations going on with Dak Prescott now, but it's going to come to a point where they'll just say, no, we're going to let this one ride out, draft someone new next year, use him to develop, but the money's going to go to Micah Parsons, arguably the best defensive player in the league right now, and CeeDee Lamb, who can make the argument to be the best wide receiver in the league. I don't think he is, but he can make that case. But now we move on to Tua Tagovailoa. And I think it's going to be I think Tua Tagovailoa is going to be paid by the Miami Dolphins. I don't think that's really the issue. But I don't think he's on course to get as much as Trevor Lawrence is. And I think the main reason for this is, and I've talked about this with a couple of other big name players, it's what you can do in the postseason that matters. Because you're not being paid for what you can do in the regular season. It's what you can do afterwards. It's why, some people may be hesitant to give Kirk Cousins that deal, or why people might have argued not to give Lamar Jackson that deal, because in the 2 seasons before he got his deal, he was injured in December and was out for the playoffs. You couldn't really trust him. And with Tua Tagovailoa, it's pretty much the same thing. Because there is the stat that goes around. You may have seen it, you might not have seen it. But if you haven't, I'm going to give it to you now. The Miami Dolphins, and this was the number spouted out before their game against the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. So before that, they were 0-10 in their previous 10 games in which the temperature was below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They then lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's now 0-11 in terms of games they have lost when the game is under 40 degrees. And given the state of the NFL, where things are going, unless the Dolphins get that number 1 seed and get the playoffs to go through Miami, you're going to have to go to a Baltimore or a Buffalo or a Cincinnati or a Pittsburgh, maybe even a Cleveland. A lot of these teams are cold weather cities. Kansas City can be cold. Buffalo. If the Jets can sort themselves out, you may have to go up to New York. All these places where the Miami Dolphins are more likely than not are going to have to go. And if Tua Tagovailoa cannot perform and the Dolphins cannot perform when it gets to playoff time in the cold, I don't see how you can justify giving him as much as Trevor Lawrence. Now, again, I'm not saying that you should not pay Tua Tagovailoa. I think he is the Miami Dolphins franchise guy, despite the injury problems that he's had. I think he has shown he's more than capable of winning a division, maybe even getting you to a 2 or a 3 or 4 seed. But it's going that next extra step when it matters, especially down the road in December. If they have to finish the season with a road game in New York, then they come home to face, for the sake of argument, Atlanta, and then they have to go up to Buffalo to end their season. those games, if they cannot perform in the cold, are going to cost them playoff seedings, going to cost them wins and spots in the playoffs. And I just don't think you can justify giving all that money to Tua if you are not going to give him the pieces around it that at least make him more comfortable. So you are going to have to take that money away from him to give it to a better offensive line and a better running back so you can control the ground game. So I just don't see how Tua Tagovailoa is going to be getting as much as Trevor Lawrence when push comes to shove. Again, if he gets it, fine, but I don't think if we are going down this line of the previous quarterback sets the market, and then regardless of the situation, the quarterback will just demand more than them. I don't see how the Dolphins would be able to justify paying Tua Tagovailoa more than Trevor Lawrence in this situation, unless something major happens that proves that he can, or he and the Dolphins can win in those cold games, because that's really where he is going to earn his money. If that's not the case, then just don't pay him. I don't see how the Dolphins can, especially if they are serious of making the most out of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and the rest of the team that they have. Very good. One of the most electrifying offenses in the NFL. But that's good in the regular season. It just doesn't translate into the playoffs, and it all starts with the quarterback. So they need to put the pieces around him to make him better, rather than expecting him to be better, because his size is whatever. It just doesn't translate well into December, January, February football. So it just can't happen for the Dolphins. But I get the feeling they are going to make that big mistake, and it's going to cost them huge. And from one quarterback that looks to dominate the AFC East to one who did dominate the AFC East, and that is Tom Brady, who, for those of you who missed it, made his commentary debut this weekend for the UFL in their championship game. He was with Fox, who are one of the broadcasters for the developmental league, and he did okay, because this was basically his warm up and his way of being introduced. I say way of being introduced. Everyone knows who Tom Brady is, but his way of being introduced in the commentary booth to us as fans, and for us to see what he's like, because this is going to be his job. He's going to be the main man for Fox, and if I'm being brutally honest, he did okay. I think for as much as you can expect Tom Brady, he has the knowledge of the game. No one can dispute that. But as someone who went through, broadcasting school and did his masters in it, it's not quite as simple as taking your knowledge and just saying it onto the screen, especially when it comes to commentating and giving analysis on American football, because you've seen how games go. The play happens, the play-by-play guy describes, here's player X duking coming up the left sideline, tackled by X down at the 25. And then he cuts over to his co-commentator, and it's basically his job to break down what happened on that play within 20 seconds. He's got to watch the full field and say, right, this happened. He couldn't, the quarterback couldn't throw there because this guy was in triple coverage. This guy was in double coverage. He didn't want that matchup. And then translate that to you in 20 seconds whilst also watching the replay. It is not easy. Again, smartest guy in the NFL, arguably in NFL history, in Tom Brady, and great at dissecting plays, but getting all that information in and then out to us within that short time frame, it is not easy. So I think he conducted himself very well in the situation that he was given. I think there was still, again, some level of camera shyness. You could see when he was first introduced by Kurt Menefee and Joel Klatt in the booth. Again, there was still that level of nervousness. You may not expect it from Tom Brady, but again, just being in that, actually having to be in the situation where you are in the booth with producers talking in your ear and having to get the details across, he did okay. Some nerves. He will obviously get better, and as I say, for a first go at what we saw from him, he didn't do too bad. And you'd assume that maybe he probably won't be commentating on the preseason games for Fox, but you imagine that maybe they'll be giving him a few more test runs. So whilst the actual commentators, it's not really on Fox nationally, but they will be getting him in to do some games and just use the feed from elsewhere and just get him to say, right, in this situation, here's what you do. I imagine they will give him some more practice before we see him actually. His debut is the Browns-Cowboys game in Week 1. So it's not going to be exactly what you saw this past weekend, but I think I am excited to see what Tom Brady brings again to the broadcasting booth, because as I've said, I don't think many people tune in to hear broadcasters. I know that a lot of people tune out because they say, oh, it's Tony Romo again, he's insufferable, I'm putting this on mute, or I'm not going to watch this game, or people tune out. I don't think people tune in specifically for a commentator or an analyst in this day and age. So I think he's going to do well, but it is just fascinating to hear, just on another level, to hear what someone like him can bring to the booth, because we've seen very good players bring what they Greg Olsen was a great tight end. Now we've seen him; he did very well. Troy Aikman, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, he did very well in the booth. But to get the actual best of all time to do commentary and see what he brings, I think that is very, very fascinating. I think it's going to be a very interesting dynamic just to see what he brings to the table, what extra 10% he brings that all the other commentators were not able to do. And sticking with TV for our final subject, I know I like to take it away from the NFL world in this, but I just think this is just too big that I can't not make this my final topic. And that is the news that was announced today. I'm recording this on Monday evening. It was announced today that HBO are going to be doing their Hard Knocks in season across an entire division. Now, we've seen Hard Knocks, the preseason work that they do, and how reluctant some teams have been in the past to sign up for it, and the fact the NFL has had to basically force it on a couple of teams. We've now seen the development in the past couple of years of the in-season Hard Knocks. And this year's in-season Hard Knocks is going to feature the entire AFC North, which many people believe is the best division in football. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Steelers fan. You will hear this from other people as well, because of the talent that's available with the Steelers, the Bengals, the Browns, and the Ravens, all of whom could theoretically win the division. And given how the playoffs have worked these days, if ever there was going to be a division that sent all 4 teams to the playoffs, I think we can all comprehensively agree it would be the AFC North, just because of how good the talent is. And now they are focusing all towards the end of the season, all on the AFC North. And I can't help but think that the NFL sort of had an inkling on this, and HBO sort of had an inkling on this when the schedules were released and when they were being created. Because I don't think it's any coincidence. Again, I'm not going down conspiracy theories, but I don't think it's any coincidence that they are focusing on the AFC North when you are going to get an AFC North matchup pretty much every single week towards the end of the season. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers, for instance, if you look at how their schedule lines up towards the end of the season, and it was funny when it sort of came out, but now you just start to think, was there something more serious behind it? Because from week 11, they have to play the Steelers, Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincinnati, Cleveland, at the Eagles, at the Ravens, against the Chiefs, and against the Bengals. They've got to play all 6 of their division games within the last 8 weeks. So you are effectively going to be getting, when the HBO cameras are going to be there, you are effectively getting an AFC matchup and the reaction to it pretty much every single week. So you cannot tell me that these two things were not interlinked. And again, great idea. I'm stunned that, again, in this highly competitive division and everything, and especially the Steelers, with the way Mike Tomlin can sometimes be in terms of keeping secrets to himself, that they were willing to, and again, maybe they were just forced to by the NFL, that he'd be willing to let the HBO cameras in behind the scenes. But I am absolutely fascinated with how this is going to go. Again, it could well be that, all 4 teams are vying for playoff spots at this point. And even if they aren't, the fact that there's going to be a team that would look to play spoiler for the other, some of the stuff you're going to get behind the scenes as players get ready for these game weeks against the rivals that have been built up from over the past couple of years, it's going to be brilliant and very, very exciting to see. So again, I don't think this was just a coincidence, but whoever came up with the idea for it and decided that it was going to be the AFC North and factoring in the schedule as well, kudos to everyone involved. I'm sure it's going to be, I'm not speaking for HBO, I'm sure the whole thing is going to be absolutely fantastic. And with that, we come to the end of the show. I want to once again thank you very much for listening. And as I said at the top, if you are new, feel free to like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to. And don't forget, you can also like and subscribe across a whole bunch of other platforms on Instagram, on TikTok, And on YouTube, it's all the same at Baldwin Sports Media. And on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. And for those of you who are regulars, once again, thank you very much for making us a part of your week. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope that you'll be back with us next week again for another week of NFL headlines and opinions and talking points. So until next time, especially in this weather, because if you're going through anything like we're going through in Pittsburgh with this pretty big heat wave, I hope you do stay safe, stay hydrated, and by all means, because I almost got caught with this weekend, don't get sunburned. But until next week, stay safe, take care.